Hey, it's Miss Henson, and I'm here with a quick tutorial on characterization. Remember that characterization is the process through which an author shows us who our characters are in our piece of literature. So first and foremost, authors can characterize or develop a character in one of two ways. When they use direct characterization, they're going to make direct statements about a character. So they're going to state it explicitly in the text. You can read it off the page. They'll talk about a character's personality or their values, their likes, their dislikes. They might even just directly describe what the character looks like. Blue eyes, blonde hair, that kind of thing. But this is supposed to help us visualize the character. And remember, visualization is when you make an image of the character in your mind. So here are some examples from famous literature. The first one from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Bingley was good-looking and gentlemanlike. He had a pleasant countenance and an easy, unaffected manners. So here Jane Austen just directly tells us what we need to know about Mr. Bingley's personality. He's good-looking, he's gentlemanlike, he has a pleasant countenance, meaning he's pretty good-looking, and he has easy, unaffected manners, meaning he's very kind of social and easygoing. So all of these things directly tell us about what kind of dude Mr. Bingley is. You see the same thing in the example from The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. Everything about him was old, except his eyes, and they were the same color as the seas and were cheerful and undefeated. So here he's talking about the old man in the boat. The Old Man and the Sea is pretty much about an old man in a boat trying to catch fish. It's more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. So we know everything about this old man seems old, which helps us kind of imagine how he might, walk or stand. But we know that his eyes, the window to the soul, were the same color as the seas, meaning they were blue, a very deep, rich blue. They were cheerful, they were undefeated. So we see that even though his physical appearance is old, he's cheerful, he's undefeated, meaning that he's not given up on life and that his eyes make this connection to the sea. So this tells us a lot about the old man who's going to have to fight this battle with this big fish in Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. So here both Austen and Hemingway directly characterize their characters. They just explicitly state what they want us to know about the character. Authors oftentimes will also use indirect characterization. They're going to show us things. The key with indirect characterization is you often have to make inferences. It is not directly stated. And remember, when you make an inference, you're kind of reading between the lines. You're taking a look at what a character says, what their thoughts are, what they do, what effect those actions have, maybe how they look, a look on their face, and you're drawing conclusions about a character. So it might be the way a character says something, or the way a character does something that tells you, oh, this character is feeling this or doing that. This takes time to fully develop. You can't just go quickly pick a sentence and go, they are blank. You normally have to look at a scene or a situation and kind of assess the totality of the circumstances. Here are a couple of examples from great literary pieces. The first one from Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. My life is a perfect graveyard of buried hopes. All right, so here, Anne, discussing her life, which is obviously not a graveyard. Her life can't be a graveyard, but she's being abstract here. She's using a metaphor, a graveyard of buried hopes, meaning all of her true hopes and dreams have been shoved down into the ground. She's had to bury them to get through life. So while she's not directly stating this, we also understand that when she says this, she's probably not feeling very hopeful. She's maybe feeling a little sad, a little defeated, maybe not seeing a way through life. And all of that tells us something about our character at that point in time. The second example is from F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. He hadn't once ceased looking at Daisy, and I think he revalued everything in his house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. So here, Fitzgerald talking about the character Gatsby as he's watching Daisy, this girl he has longed for and pined for many, many, many years, as she walks around and looks at his incredibly fancy and rich mansion. And so we notice that Gatsby, he doesn't stop looking at Daisy, and he seems to be judging kind of how good his life is based on how Daisy reacts to things. This tells us Gatsby's depth of love for Daisy. This tells us how much value he puts in Daisy's opinion, and it tells us something about how Gatsby feels about Daisy, although it's not directly stated. When authors develop characters, you also have a couple of character types that can be done interchangeably. So remember, direct and indirect characterization is all about how the author chooses to utilize language to build their characters. All right, once they've built those characters can either be flat or round, dynamic or static, which is what we're going to talk about now. So when an author builds a flat character, they are pretty one-dimensional, and what you see is what you get. These characters aren't bad to have. Some great famous characters are, just very flat, very basic characters. They're often background characters, or they're characters that play very specific roles at particular points in a text. Like, my favorite is Crush the Turtle, all right, because he, like me, loves the word dude, all right? Crush the Turtle in Nemo, very one-dimensional. He's a nice, easygoing dude. He's super helpful. He's super chill. And that's kind of what we know about him. There's not much else there. We know what we're getting with Crush the Turtle. He's not bad to have. He plays a very, critical and important role in Nemo's journey, but there's not much to him. These characters are almost their archetypes or their stereotypes because they're so flat, meaning they're so one-dimensional. Other examples here include the hyenas from The Lion King, who are just this pivot point of evil, or Chip, the little teacup from Beauty and the Beast, who is just supposed to be this childlike figure who expresses this kind of hope and love and innocence, and that's what he does. The opposite of a flat character is a round character. These are characters who are fully developed, and when they say fully developed, that is a question of normally a character's emotional growth or a character's kind of psychological state. It feels like these characters could be real people. They are three-dimensional. Often these characters come with histories, background stories. We know what they value. We know what they fear. These characters have goals, that kind of thing, and they are often, most round characters are also dynamic characters. More on that in a minute. But that means that they will change. So if we think about Shrek, great classic film literary character here, Shrek's whole goal in the very first video, anyways, was to save his swamp. So we know Shrek's past, we know he's been shunned by society, and of course he's going to undertake this journey to save his swamp, and by saving his swamp, of course he's going to reintegrate to society and learn something about himself. You kind of see the same thing with Wreck-It Ralph. Particularly in the very first Wreck-It Ralph, we see that Ralph has feelings. He wants to be a hero. He wants to be viewed some other way than what he is. He values certain things. He wants friends. Those guys are, of course, inherently good. Keep in mind that round characters can also be, villains and kind of inherently bad. Like we think of Darth Vader, who has this very elaborate kind of background history in Star Wars. He does have a very particular set of values. They're not real great ones, but he does have them. Of course, he has fears, but he also strikes fear into everyone else, and he has goals. Of course, he wants to get rid of the Empire, these kinds of things. So just because a character is a round character doesn't mean that they have to be inherently a good character. Remember, characters, whether they're flat and round, also can be dynamic or static. So dynamic characters change. And if you're remembering dynamic, that's the word you want to come back to. They change throughout the story. They undergo some kind of growth or development. These characters are often on psychological or emotional or physical journeys of some kind. They do not necessarily have to be your main character, your protagonist, but they do change. They have values, a personality. Their ideals about life change. So if we think about the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, of course he's in the original, he's closed off from the world and he's angry and he had those very negative values and he didn't want to help the witch, which is how he turned into the Beast to begin with. But we see as he interacts with Belle, his behavior and how he sees the world changes, which would make him dynamic. We see the same thing for Elsa in Frozen or for Neville Longbottom in the Harry Potter series. Of course, Neville Longbottom starts out kind of being shy and meek and timid, a little afraid. He might even, he's a little bit of a nerd. He might be a little bullied, that kind of thing. But we see Neville come into his own and find his power and his authority and really realize his own strength as the Harry Potter series progresses. Keep in mind that most of the changes in dynamic characters are internal changes. They're going to undergo normally some kind of emotional or psychological change, all right, which ultimately changes their behavior. And then, of course, there are static characters. Static characters don't change internally. They are rocks, all right? They are pretty much on the same emotional keel. They have the same set of personality traits, the same set of morals throughout the course of a story. They are not always a villain. They can be good characters, they can be bad characters, but their position on the world, how they look at the world, does not change. So if you think of Timon and Pumbaa in The Lion King, all right, they're a great happy-go-lucky, pair of guys. I mean, all I can think of here is Hakuna Matata, all right, and that is their whole life outlook, right? Hakuna Matata. It means no worries for the rest of your days, and that is how Timon and Pumbaa approach life, and that does not change. Does not matter what happens, all right? The dynamic character in that piece, of course, is Simba, who's undergoing great changes about his place in the world, all right? And he needs Timon and Pumbaa for support, but Timon and Pumbaa are static characters. They don't change. Same thing can be said with Benedict Cumberbatch's portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, which you can see in the top right-hand corner of your screen. He's an incredibly interesting character, but he is very much so a set character. He's static. We know what type of guy Sherlock Holmes is. We know how he approaches the world, and that doesn't change throughout the course of the series. And of course, there are other examples on the screen as well. Thanks for hanging out with me in this short little quick lesson. This combined with the videos that you saw prior to should give you a good understanding of characters as you move forward into the other activities.